The rain hadn't stopped for 3 days. It came down in thin, needling sheets, soaking the cracked pavement of the small-town storage lot and blurring the view of the crowd gathered beneath a row of crooked umbrellas. A man in a neon windbreaker shouted bids over the noise of the storm, his voice hoarse but practiced. Lot 19, abandoned unit overdue since 1996, opening bid $50. No one expected much. Maybe a few boxes, some forgotten furniture, the sad detritus of a life once lived. But when the rusted metal door groaned open and rolled upward, the crowd fell silent. Inside, bathed in the pale gray light, sat a dust-caked 1994 Honda Civic. Its once blue paint was now a dull, mossy green. The tires were flat. The windows were smeared with years of grime. But the real shock wasn't its condition. It was the parking decal still clinging to the rear window. State College, 1995. Rachel Hale wasn't there when the storage unit opened. She was 200 miles away in Chicago, writing another forgettable article about City Hall corruption, trying not to think about the sister she had lost 11 years earlier. But when her phone rang and a detective's voice spoke her name, her world narrowed to a pinpoint. "Ms. Hale, we believe we've found your sister's car." The words hit harder than she expected. Rachel had spent years rehearsing what she'd do if something like this ever happened, how calm she'd be, how rational. But now she could barely speak. "Emily's car," she whispered. "Yes, a 1994 Civic. Same plates, VIN matches. It turned up in a storage auction here in Ohio. We think you should come down." The last time Rachel had seen that car was the night Emily disappeared, October 12, 1995. She'd been 21, a literature major with a crooked smile and a laugh that could disarm anyone. Emily had called that night to say she was heading to a friend's party off campus and would call when she got home. The call never came. Police had searched for months, but no trace was ever found. No car, no body, nothing. The case eventually went cold, and Rachel, just 21 herself at the time, was left with a lifetime of questions and a wound that never closed. Rachel arrived at the storage facility the next afternoon. The sky was heavy and low, the rain finally spent but leaving everything damp and gray. Detective Mark Jenner, now deep into retirement but still sharp-eyed, greeted her at the gate. "Didn't think I'd see you again," he said softly. "I wish it were under different circumstances." They walked together to the unit. The Civic looked even smaller than Rachel remembered, dwarfed by the cavernous space. The sight of it made her knees weak. It was like stepping into a memory, only this memory was coated in 11 years of dust and silence. "Who owned the unit?" she asked. "Fake name, cash payments until 2001, then nothing. It's been abandoned since." Jenner paused, glancing at her. "We'll run the security footage, but my guess, whoever stored this didn't want it found." Rachel stepped closer. Her fingers trembled as she brushed the grime off the driver's side window. Inside, the upholstery was mildewed, the dashboard cracked from years of neglect. But something else caught her eye, a small, water-stained notebook on the passenger seat. She pulled on gloves and picked it up. The cover was soft and warped, the ink inside smeared and nearly illegible, but on the second page one phrase was still clear. "If you're reading this, I'm probably gone." Her breath caught. It was Emily's handwriting. The car was impounded, and the evidence team combed through every inch. Most of what they found was ordinary: an empty soda can, some cassette tapes, a few receipts dated just weeks before Emily vanished. But the most chilling discovery was in the trunk. There was no blood, no signs of violence. Just a damp, moldy backpack containing Emily's college ID, a paperback novel she'd been reading, and a Polaroid photo Rachel had never seen before. Emily was in the picture. She was smiling, but it wasn't a natural smile. It was strained, forced. Behind her, barely visible in the blurry background, was a neon motel sign. Rachel stared at the image for what felt like hours. Where was this taken, and who had taken it? That night, Rachel lay awake in her motel room, the photo on the nightstand beside her. She thought about the last conversation they'd had. Emily had sounded distracted that evening, nervous even. She'd brushed it off as pre-party jitters. But now, with this photo and the message in the notebook, Rachel wondered if Emily had known something was wrong, if she'd tried to warn her. The questions churned in her head. Why hide the car for over a decade? Why keep the contents intact? And most unsettling of all, who had access to a storage unit in the middle of nowhere under a fake name? At 3 a.m., she couldn't sleep anymore. She sat at the motel's small writing desk, the notebook open before her, scribbling names, timelines, and theories. 11 years had passed, but Rachel knew one thing: the story wasn't over. Emily hadn't just disappeared. Someone had made her disappear. The following morning, Rachel returned to the storage facility, determined to see the car again. She asked Jenner to open the trunk one more time. As the metal lid creaked upward, something caught the light, something she hadn't noticed before. On the underside of the trunk lid, scratched faintly into the metal, were 3 words. "He knows." Rachel's heart pounded. She stepped back, her mind racing. Who was he? What did he know? And why leave a message hidden there where only someone determined, someone like her, would find it? Jenner looked at her, brow furrowed. "We didn't see that yesterday." "Because we weren't supposed to," Rachel murmured. The detective studied her face, then sighed. "I don't want you getting pulled back into this, Rachel. It's been 11 years. Sometimes we don't get answers." Rachel met his eyes. There was a fire in hers he hadn't seen since the early days of the investigation. "No," she said quietly. "Sometimes we don't look hard enough." That night, Rachel returned home to Chicago with the photo tucked in her coat pocket and the phrase "he knows" echoing in her mind. She poured herself a drink, sat by the window, and stared out at the rain. She spent more than a decade trying to move on. She told herself Emily was gone, that nothing she did would change that. But now there was something, a lead, a message, a trail of breadcrumbs left behind in a trunk no one was supposed to open. Rachel picked up her phone and called her editor. "I need time off," she said. "I'm working on something personal." "Personal?" "My sister," Rachel replied, staring at the Polaroid. "I think she's trying to tell me what happened." The morning after the email arrived, Rachel stared at it again, hoping she'd misread. But the words hadn't changed. "Stop looking." It wasn't a warning from a concerned friend. It was a threat. And to Rachel, that meant one thing: she was finally pulling on the right thread. She forwarded the message to a contact she trusted at the paper's cybersecurity desk, then grabbed her coat. If someone wanted her to stop, they had reason to be afraid. And if they were afraid, there was still something buried beneath all these years. The autumn of 1995 had been colder than usual. The wind rolled off the lake and into town like an icy tide, and campus walkways were littered with golden leaves and empty coffee cups from the student union. Emily Hale had always loved fall. She'd walk the long way to class just to feel the air and watch the colors change. But that October, she seemed distracted, still smiling, still laughing, but different, secretive. Rachel remembered their last phone call like a scar. Emily had called 2 days before she vanished, rambling about a big decision she had to make. She promised they'd talk more that weekend. She never called back. Back then, Rachel had been too young, too trusting. She believed the police when they said her sister probably ran away. But looking back now, she knew that was never Emily. Emily was careful. She planned things. If she'd left, she would have told someone. Rachel's first stop was the campus police station. The original investigators had retired, but the records, brittle and yellowed with age, were still there, tucked into a forgotten filing cabinet. She signed the paperwork, and within an hour she was staring at the thick case file labeled Hale, EMILY, missing person, OCT 1995. She flipped through page after page, statements from friends, classmates, professors. But something bothered her. Most of the statements were surface level, rushed. Some names she remembered from Emily's stories weren't even interviewed. It felt sloppy, or maybe deliberate. One detail made her pulse quicken: a witness statement from a student named Kyle Morris. He'd claimed to have seen Emily arguing with a man outside the English building 2 weeks before she disappeared. He described the man as older, mid-40s, wearing a brown trench coat. The police never followed up. Rachel found Kyle in a small suburb 2 towns over. He was in his late 30s now, heavier, slower, but his eyes still carried the weight of memory. "Emily Hale," he said, surprised when she showed up at his doorstep. "God, I haven't heard that name in years." He invited her inside. His house was quiet, lined with books and old college photos. Rachel noticed one on the mantel, a picture of Emily at a Halloween party, Kyle standing a few feet behind her. "I always felt guilty," he admitted. "I told the police about that guy, but they didn't seem interested. Said there was no evidence she was in danger." "Can you remember anything about him?" Rachel pressed. Kyle rubbed his temples. "He was older, way older than us, looked like faculty. I remember thinking he was angry, really angry." He grabbed her arm. She pulled away. "Did she seem scared?" He nodded slowly, terrified. Rachel's stomach turned. Why had this never been investigated? Back in Chicago, Rachel spent hours poring over archived yearbooks and faculty rosters from 1995. She was looking for someone, anyone, who matched Kyle's description. And then she saw him. Dr. Vincent Marsh, literature professor. Mid-40s at the time. Married, respected, published. He'd abruptly resigned from the university 2 months after Emily's disappearance and vanished from public record. Rachel's fingers hovered over the keyboard as she searched for his name. It took some digging, but eventually she found a clue. Marsh had taken a position at a private college in Pennsylvania under a slightly altered name, V.A. Marshfield. She stared at the screen. If Emily had been seeing him, or if she'd threatened to expose something, it could explain why someone wanted her gone. Rachel returned to campus, this time walking the same path Emily would have taken the night she disappeared. It was colder now, the trees bare and skeletal, but the layout hadn't changed much. The party had been at a fraternity house on Maple Street. Emily left alone around 11:45 p.m. The distance to her dorm was less than a mile. Yet, somewhere along that short walk, she vanished. Rachel paused at a narrow alley that ran behind the English building. Police reports noted it had been searched, but not thoroughly. A janitor had reported seeing an unfamiliar car idling there that night, but the detail had been dismissed as inconclusive. Rachel's breath fogged in the cold. 11 years later, the alley still felt heavy, charged. If someone had forced Emily into a car here, no one would have seen a thing. That night, Rachel dug deeper into the parking records from 1995. Most had been destroyed or digitized into oblivion, but one record remained, a handwritten citation for a 1994 Honda Civic issued 2 days after Emily vanished. The signature on the ticket was a campus officer's. But what made Rachel's blood run cold was the location. A faculty parking lot on the far side of campus, nowhere near Emily's dorm, the party, or any place she'd normally go. Someone had been driving her car after she disappeared. Rachel took the information to Detective Jenner. The old man sighed when he saw the ticket. "This should have been followed up," he muttered, shaking his head. "But back then, cases like this got shelved too quickly." "Can you reopen it?" Rachel asked. He hesitated. "It's complicated. Statutes, jurisdiction, lack of new evidence." But he looked at the photo of the parking ticket again. "If you find more like this, we might have something." Rachel understood what he was really saying. The system wouldn't save her. If she wanted answers, she'd have to dig them up herself. That night, another email arrived. This one was longer. "We warned you, walk away. She left because she wanted to. If you don't stop, you'll regret it." No signature, no traceable sender. Rachel stared at the screen, her heartbeat thundering in her ears. Whoever this was, they weren't bluffing. Someone was watching. Someone who knew what happened in 1995. Someone who wanted the past to stay buried. But Rachel was done listening to warnings. She printed the email and pinned it above her desk, next to the Polaroid and the scratched message from the trunk. He knows. The next morning, a brown envelope arrived at Rachel's apartment with no return address. Inside were 3 grainy photographs, surveillance-style shots of Rachel walking to her car, grocery shopping, entering her apartment. And scrawled across the last photo in thick red ink were 2 chilling words. Not again. Rachel's hands trembled as she stared at the images. This was no coincidence. The person who had taken Emily might still be out there, and now they were watching her. The envelope stayed on Rachel's kitchen table for 3 days, unopened except for those 3 photographs she couldn't stop staring at. She knew she should turn them over to the police, but something inside her resisted. It wasn't that she didn't trust them, though after years of incompetence she didn't, but rather that she needed to handle this herself. If she gave it to the authorities, it would become evidence and disappear into another cold case file, and Emily would vanish all over again. Rachel hadn't slept more than a few hours at a time since the car was found. Every creak of the apartment, every passing car on the street below sent her nerves sparking. She'd taken to checking the locks 3 times before bed, then again at 2 a.m. when she inevitably woke up. A dull paranoia had begun creeping into her bones. Someone had followed her, watched her, photographed her. And now they knew she wouldn't stop. Her mother noticed the change first. When Rachel visited that Sunday, her mother didn't offer her tea like usual. She just stared, worried and exhausted. "Are you sleeping?" her mother asked quietly. "Not really," Rachel admitted, trying to smile. "Maybe you shouldn't be doing this. You're reopening wounds that never healed." "They never healed because no one tried to close them," Rachel snapped. It came out sharper than she meant. Her mother flinched, setting her mug down on the table. "I lost her too, Rachel, but you're losing yourself now. Do you think Emily would want that?" Rachel swallowed hard. She wanted to argue, but the words wouldn't come. She kissed her mother's cheek and left without finishing her tea. Guilt gnawed at her, but the anger burned hotter. She couldn't stop now, not when she was closer than ever. The investigation was starting to take its toll on her relationships. Her boyfriend, Matt, had tried to be supportive, but even his patience was fraying. He found her in the living room one night surrounded by printouts, old news clippings, university rosters, a map of the town with red pins marking every place Emily had been seen. "This isn't healthy," he said gently, placing a hand on her shoulder. "It's necessary." "Rachel, look at yourself. You're barely eating. You're not sleeping. You've got a wall covered in conspiracy notes like some crime drama." "It's not a conspiracy," she hissed, pulling away. "It's my sister." Matt sighed and leaned against the doorway. "I know you think you're doing this for her, but I'm starting to think you're doing it for you. Maybe because you don't know who you are without this, without the mystery." The words stung because there was truth buried inside them. Rachel had built her adult life around a void shaped like Emily. Her career as a crime journalist, her obsession with cold cases, even the walls she'd built around her heart. It all came back to that night in 1995. And maybe, deep down, she was terrified of what life would look like once the mystery was solved. Matt left that night. He didn't say it was over, but the silence that followed felt like a goodbye. Rachel forced herself to focus on the investigation. The name that still haunted her was Vincent Marsh, the professor who'd resigned after Emily disappeared. She learned he was now teaching under an alias in a small liberal arts college in Pennsylvania. After a week of debating whether it was too risky, she decided to confront him. The campus was small and picturesque, with ivy climbing the old brick walls and students milling between classes. Rachel waited outside Marsh's office, her heart hammering until he stepped out. A decade older, grayer, but unmistakably the same man from the yearbook photo. "Dr. Marsh," she said, her voice steady. He looked confused. "Do I know you?" "My name is Rachel Hale. I'm Emily Hale's sister." The color drained from his face. For a moment he didn't move. Then he gestured toward his office. "We shouldn't speak here. Come in." Inside, the air felt heavier. Books lined the walls and a faint smell of pipe tobacco lingered. Marsh sat down behind his desk, his hands trembling slightly. "I remember Emily," he said quietly. "She was brilliant, sharp, too sharp for someone her age." "Were you involved with her?" Rachel asked, her voice like steel. He looked away. "I cared for her deeply, but she ended things, said she wanted to focus on her future. I respected that." "Someone saw you arguing with her 2 weeks before she disappeared." Marsh sighed. "I was angry. She threatened to expose the relationship. It would have destroyed my career. But I swear to you, Rachel, I didn't harm her. I was devastated when she vanished." Rachel studied him carefully. He looked genuine, scared even, but she'd been lied to before. "Why did you resign?" "I couldn't stay there. Everyone looked at me like I was guilty. And maybe I was, in a way, not of hurting her, but of failing her." The conversation left Rachel with more questions than answers. Marsh seemed broken, haunted. Either he was telling the truth, or he was a master manipulator. Back home, Rachel dug through Emily's old notebooks again. One entry caught her eye, dated just days before she vanished. "He says it's over, but I don't believe him. I think he's watching me. I think he followed me after class today." The handwriting was rushed, panicked, and the next line chilled Rachel to the bone. "It's not Marsh, it's someone else." Her mind reeled. Emily had been scared of someone, but not the professor. So who was it? She pulled out the Polaroid again. Emily's strained smile. The neon motel sign in the background. Rachel started searching for motels near the college that existed in 1995. Only one matched the blurry red lettering in the photo, the Redwood Inn, 20 miles from campus. It was still standing, though barely. A sagging, half-abandoned structure now catering mostly to truckers and transients. Rachel drove there the next morning. The parking lot was cracked and empty, and the lobby smelled of stale cigarettes and mildew. The clerk behind the counter barely looked up as she approached. "I'm looking for information about a guest from 1995, she said, flashing an old press badge. Her name was Emily Hale. The man laughed. "Lady, I wasn't even working here then." "Can I see your old records?" "Records that old don't exist. Place barely keeps track of last week." Defeated but not deterred, Rachel decided to explore the property. Room 12, visible in the reflection in the Polaroid, was boarded up, but the door had been pried open at some point. Inside, the room was stripped bare except for a single rusted bed frame and a broken mirror on the wall. She crouched, scanning the floor. Dust and debris covered everything, but in the far corner, something glinted beneath the filth. She reached for it with gloved fingers and froze. It was a small gold pendant, Emily's. The same one she'd worn every day since her 16th birthday. Rachel's chest tightened. Emily had been here at this motel, likely against her will. She drove home with trembling hands, the pendant clutched tightly in her fist. Her mind was a whirlwind of grief, rage, and grim determination. Someone had kept her sister here. Someone had lied, and they were still out there. That night, another message arrived. This time, a handwritten note slipped under her apartment door. "You're digging in the wrong place." No signature, no clue, just the same creeping dread that had been following her for weeks. Rachel stared out the window into the darkness, a storm raging in her chest. Whoever they were watching every move she made. And if they were warning her off, it meant she was close, closer than she'd ever been. And she wasn't stopping, not now, not ever. Rachel didn't sleep that night. She sat in the dark living room with the small gold pendant clutched in her palm until dawn broke through the blinds, finding it had changed everything. This wasn't just about faded police reports or forgotten memories anymore. This was evidence. physical proof that Emily had been alive, terrified, and held somewhere she didn't want to be. When the first light touched the windowsill, Rachel called Detective Jenner. She told him about the motel, the pendant, and the boarded-up room 12. He listened in silence and then sighed heavily. "It's enough to warrant a site search," he said. "But after 11 years, don't expect miracles. If there was a crime scene there, it's probably long gone." "I don't care," Rachel replied. "I'm going back. I want to be there when they look." 2 days later, investigators combed through the redwood in room. Most of it was useless: degraded fibers, rotted wood, dust from decades. But a single bloodstain was recovered from beneath a layer of floorboards. It was too old to yield a full DNA profile, but it was human, and it shouldn't have been there. The motel manager swore no crime had ever been reported in that room, and yet Emily's pendant had been found there, and someone had bled there. Rachel's instincts screamed that this was the place where everything had changed. That night, as she organized her notes, she noticed something in the Polaroid she hadn't seen before. A faint reflection in the window behind Emily, a glowing red neon sign that read 12-hour stay vacancy. She scoured old business records until she found a match. The Redwood Inn signage had been replaced in 1997, which meant the photo had to have been taken there before that date. Emily had been alive after her disappearance date. The revelation hit like a punch. It wasn't just an abduction. Someone had kept her. Rachel decided to retrace Emily's last days before she vanished. She visited the old campus library and requested archived security logs. Buried in the paperwork was something strange: 2 sign-in entries in Emily's name dated 3 days after she was declared missing. No one had ever investigated them. Was it someone impersonating her, or had she been allowed or forced to return briefly? Rachel found a retired librarian, Mrs. Dawson, who remembered Emily clearly. "She was here a few days before she disappeared," the woman said. "She seemed jumpy. She kept checking over her shoulder." "Do you remember seeing her after she vanished?" Rachel asked. Mrs. Dawson frowned, thinking hard. "Now that you mention it, I thought I saw her once, a week or so later. She was in the stacks with a man. I waved. She looked scared. Then they left before I could speak to her." "A man?" Rachel's pulse quickened. "Can you describe him?" "Tall, older, baseball cap, but the thing I remember most," the librarian's voice faltered. "She didn't look like herself, like she'd been crying for days." It was the most significant lead Rachel had ever uncovered, proof that Emily had been alive after the investigation stopped, proof that the police had missed something crucial. The next step was clear: find out who had accessed that library on those dates. Rachel petitioned the university for archived ID logs. Most had been lost to time, but a few records remained, and one name stood out: Daniel Price. Price had been a campus security officer in the mid-90s. He was fired for misconduct just months before Emily vanished. His personnel file was thin, suspiciously thin, but the little that remained suggested a history of harassment complaints and an explosive temper. Rachel's hands trembled as she printed his file. She dug deeper, pulling every scrap she could find: old news articles, arrest records, social media traces. It wasn't much, but one detail made her stomach twist. Price had disappeared in 1996, less than a year after Emily. He hadn't just left town, he'd vanished too. Rachel shared her findings with Jenner, who listened quietly. "We interviewed him back then," he said. "Said he didn't know anything. We didn't have evidence to hold him." "You didn't have the pendant. You didn't have the blood. You didn't know he was with her after she vanished." Jenner nodded grimly. "We do now." Investigators tracked down Price's last known address: a decrepit farmhouse 30 miles outside of town, abandoned for over a decade. Rachel insisted on going with them. She needed to see it with her own eyes. The house was a graveyard of dust and rot. Windows boarded, wallpaper peeling, the air thick with mold. But in the basement, beneath a loose wooden plank, they found a small box. Inside, several women's driver's licenses, a bundle of faded photographs, and Emily's student ID card. Rachel stared at it, her throat tight. She was here, she whispered. But the photographs were worse. They were of multiple women, all posed the same way, sitting in a chair, hands bound, expressions vacant. Most were unknown to Rachel, but one tucked at the bottom was Emily. Her hair was matted, her eyes hollow, but it was her. She was alive. The evidence suggested Price had taken others too. Maybe Emily hadn't been his first victim. Maybe she hadn't been his last. That night, Rachel's apartment was broken into. Nothing was stolen, except the Polaroid and the pendant. A single note was left on the kitchen table. "You're getting close." The police treated it as a warning, maybe from someone tied to Price. But to Rachel, it was confirmation. She was on the right path, and whoever had kept Emily didn't want her digging deeper. She refused to back down. She requested the property records for Price's farmhouse. One detail caught her eye. It had been purchased by a holding company 2 weeks after his disappearance, an anonymous LLC with no clear owner. Someone had cleaned up after him. Someone had protected him. Days later, forensic results came back from the blood sample at the motel. It was degraded and partial, but one allele matched someone in the national database. When Jenner called her into the precinct, she braced for the worst. "It's not Emily's blood," he said. "It belongs to another missing woman, Vanessa Cole, disappeared in '96. Rachel felt sick. Whoever had taken Emily had likely taken others too, and if Price was involved, he wasn't acting alone. That night, Rachel sat surrounded by evidence, photos, notes, records, feeling the walls close in. Emily's story was no longer just about a college girl who vanished. It was part of something larger, darker. And if the truth was that Price had been a predator, then someone had helped him. Someone had funded him. Someone had kept his secrets for over a decade. Her phone buzzed. A new email appeared with no subject line, no body, just a single attachment. It was a scanned page from a diary, Emily's handwriting. "He says he's not the one in charge. There's someone else. Someone who decides what happens to us." Rachel stared at the words, her heart thundering. This wasn't just a kidnapping. It was an operation, and Emily had known there was someone else behind it all. The question that now consumed her wasn't just what happened to her sister. It was who had been pulling the strings all along. Rachel's hands shook as she printed out the diary page for the 5th time, each word etched into her memory. "He's not the one in charge, there's someone else." The phrase repeated in her mind like a drumbeat. Whoever Daniel Price was, however monstrous his actions, he wasn't the final link in the chain. Someone else had orchestrated this. Someone had controlled it. The revelation terrified her more than anything she'd uncovered so far, but it also sharpened her resolve. If there was someone else involved, they had likely been close to Emily, someone she trusted, someone who had access to her life. And that meant it was time to go back to the very beginning. Rachel requested access to the original police interview transcripts from 1995. It took weeks of legal wrangling and public records requests, but eventually she was sitting in a sterile records room, leafing through the thin, badly organized case file. She read and reread every witness statement, every lead. And then, tucked near the back, she found something strange, an interview with her father. It wasn't long, barely 2 paragraphs, but one detail jumped out. He reported seeing Emily's car parked on County Road 7 2 nights after she disappeared. It was a detail he'd never shared with Rachel or her mother. It had been written down and forgotten. Heart-hammering, she drove to the old family house that weekend. Her father was sitting on the porch, older now, more fragile, but still with that same air of silence he'd carried since 1995. "Why didn't you ever tell me?" Rachel asked before she was even inside. "Tell you what?" "About the car, about seeing it after Emily disappeared." Her father's eyes went wide. He exhaled slowly and rubbed his face. "I didn't want you or your mother to know. I thought I was doing the right thing." "The right thing? You moved her car. Why?" "I panicked," he whispered. "I found it abandoned by the side of the road. The keys were still in it. There was blood on the back seat, not much, but enough. I was terrified. I thought if the police found it like that, they'd blame me or think she'd been killed. I drove it somewhere safe." "Safe?" Rachel's voice was trembling. "You hid it. You buried evidence." Tears welled in his eyes. "I was scared, Rachel. I was trying to protect the family. I thought maybe she'd come home. I thought if there was no crime scene, no scandal, she'd just walk through the door." Rachel stared at him, struggling to process the betrayal. Her father had tampered with the single most important piece of evidence, the car, and had kept it secret for 11 years. How much had the investigation missed because of that? How much time had been wasted? "Did you ever see her?" Rachel asked softly. His eyes darted away. "No, but someone did." "What do you mean?" "A man came by the house 2 weeks after she vanished. Said he was from the university. He asked if we'd heard from her, said she was in trouble but safe. He told us not to talk to the press. I never saw him again." "Do you remember his name?" Her father shook his head. "No name, but I remember his eyes, cold, like he wasn't afraid of anything." Rachel left that night shaking with anger and confusion. If her father had seen the car, it meant Emily had likely been alive after the official disappearance date. And if a man had come to the house, that meant someone knew where she was and deliberately kept the family in the dark. The next day, Rachel confronted Detective Jenner with what she'd learned. He was furious. "If we'd had that car back then, maybe we would have had evidence to charge someone," he said. "This changes everything." But even with that revelation, they were still stuck. The trail was cold, and Price was still missing. The only lead left was the anonymous LLC that had purchased his farmhouse. Rachel was determined to trace it. After weeks of digging through public filings and shell companies, she finally found a name that made her blood run cold. V.A. Marshfield. The professor. The man who swore he had nothing to do with Emily's disappearance. The man who claimed he had simply loved her and moved on. Rachel's anger flared white-hot. Marsh had lied. He hadn't disappeared after resigning. He'd gone underground, quietly managing shell corporations and laundering property linked to Price. The professor and the campus security guard had been connected from the beginning. Armed with the evidence, Rachel drove to Pennsylvania and waited outside Marsh's house. When he finally appeared, older, slower, but still sharp, she followed him to a grocery store parking lot and confronted him. "You lied to me," she said, her voice trembling with fury. "You and Daniel Price were working together." Marsh froze. His hand shook slightly as he adjusted his glasses. "I don't know what you're talking about." "I have records tying you to the property where Emily's ID was found. You paid the taxes on that land. You knew about it." The professor sighed, his mask slipping. "I tried to help her," he whispered. "I didn't know what Price was planning. He said he could keep her safe, that she wanted to disappear." "Safe?" Rachel snapped. "She was kidnapped, she was tortured." "I didn't know," Marsh's voice cracked. "When I realized what he'd done, it was too late. I wanted to go to the police, but I was implicated. I was terrified." "Then why keep paying for the property?" "Because," he whispered, "I thought she was still alive." Rachel's heart stopped. "Alive?" Marsh nodded slowly. "Price told me she was alive long after the investigation stopped. He said she was being moved, that she was valuable." Rachel stared at him, 1,000 questions fighting for space in her mind. Valuable to who? Why keep her alive? What did they want with her? Marsh refused to say more, but as Rachel turned to leave, he muttered one final thing under his breath. "He's still out there, and he's not the worst of them." That night, Rachel returned home to find her apartment door ajar. Every drawer, every cabinet had been torn apart. On the floor, taped to the wall of her evidence board, was a single Polaroid she had never seen before. Emily tied to a chair, tears streaming down her face, the same motel wallpaper in the background. And scrawled across the bottom in red ink, "She's not gone." Rachel's legs gave out beneath her. She fell to the floor, the photo clutched to her chest, sobbing for the first time in years. Emily wasn't a cold case. She wasn't a ghost. She was somewhere, maybe alive, maybe waiting. For the first time since 1995, Rachel felt something she hadn't dared feel in a long time. Hoping. But with it came a deeper, darker realization. She wasn't just chasing a ghost anymore. She was hunting a living monster, and he knew she was coming. Rachel stared at the Polaroid for hours, numb and trembling. She traced Emily's face with her finger again and again, memorizing every detail: the tear-streaked cheeks, the vacant stare, the way her wrists were bound so tightly they looked bruised. It was her. Not a body, not a ghost. A living, breathing Emily, terrified and alive long after everyone said she was gone. But the photo raised more questions than it answered. When had it been taken? Was Emily still alive now, or had this been a cruel photograph from decades ago? And if she was alive, where was she? Rachel barely slept for the next 3 nights. Her apartment felt watched. Every noise, every passing car outside made her flinch. She moved all her case files into a single locked trunk, installed extra locks, even taped over her laptop camera. The photo had shaken her more than anything else. It wasn't just evidence, it was a message, a taunt, a promise. And it meant she had no choice but to go further than she ever had before. Her first step was to analyze the photo itself. She scanned it at the newspaper office, running it through filters and enlarging every pixel. Behind Emily's chair in the blurry background, there was a small object Rachel hadn't noticed before: a rusted radiator with a dented copper pipe and a piece of yellow caution tape fluttering nearby. She spent hours cross-referencing old building permits, trying to match that exact style of radiator. Finally, she found a match: a specific brand of heating unit installed in abandoned municipal buildings in Ohio in the 1980s. Only 3 locations still had them installed. One was the Redwood Inn. Another was an abandoned juvenile detention facility 20 miles outside Columbus. Her heart pounded. If Emily had been held there, maybe she was still there, or maybe the people who took her had left something behind. Rachel called Detective Jenner and told him everything. He warned her to stay away, that they'd get a search warrant and handle it. But Rachel knew how slowly the system worked. She couldn't risk losing the trail again. The detention center loomed over the tree line like a forgotten tomb, its windows shattered, its walls crawling with ivy. Rachel broke in through a side door, her flashlight cutting through the darkness. Dust hung in the air like ash. It smelled of rot and time and something else, something chemical and bitter. Room by room she searched. Empty cells, decaying furniture, nothing. But on the lower level in a basement storage room she found something that made her blood run cold. An iron chair bolted to the floor, its leather restraints still intact. Scratches clawed into the wall nearby formed 2 words: "Help me." Rachel's knees buckled. Emily had been here. On the floor beneath the chair, she found something even more chilling: a torn piece of notebook paper with Emily's handwriting on it. Faded, almost illegible, but still there. "If anyone finds this, I'm alive. I'm still alive. Please don't stop looking." Rachel sat on the cold concrete floor and sobbed. 11 years. 11 years of silence, and here was proof that her sister had been begging for help the entire time. She photographed everything, gathered what she could, and fled the building before nightfall. The evidence forced the police to act. A full forensic team swept the facility. They found fingerprints, many belonging to Daniel Price, but they also found others, still unidentified. And among the debris, they discovered something that made Rachel's stomach churn: a small glass vial with residue from a sedative often used in human trafficking operations. It was no longer just a kidnapping investigation. This was organized, coordinated, industrial. Detective Jenner pulled Rachel aside after the search. "There's something you should see," he said gravely. He slid a folder across the table. Inside were records, bank transfers, property leases, transportation logs, all tied to shell companies connected to the same holding group that had owned Price's farmhouse. Millions of dollars had moved through them in the mid to late 90s. "This wasn't just Price," Jenner said. "This was a network, and we think Emily was part of something much larger." Rachel felt sick. "Like what?" "Human trafficking," he said. "The kind that doesn't end." Her breath caught. "Are you saying she might still be alive?" Jenner's expression was grim. "It's possible, but if she is, she's not here. Not anymore." Rachel couldn't stop thinking about the word valuable. Marsh had used it, the diary had used it, and now the police were using it. It suggested Emily hadn't been killed because she was worth more alive. But to whom? And for what? She spent nights digging deeper into financial records, cross-referencing every transaction connected to the holding company. One name surfaced again and again: Northbridge Industries, a private security and logistics firm that didn't exist before 1996 and vanished from corporate records in 2001. There were rumors online, dark, unverified claims about Northbridge's involvement in special transport operations across state lines. Some mentioned missing persons. Others spoke of long-term containment. It was too much to be coincidence. Rachel's obsession began consuming her. She quit her job at the newspaper, telling her editor she needed time. Friends stopped calling. Her mother barely spoke to her anymore. Every waking moment became about Emily, about the next lead, the next connection, the next clue. And then, just when she felt she was hitting another dead end, something strange happened. A letter arrived in her mailbox with no return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper and a faded photo of Emily, older now, maybe late 20s or early 30s. She was thinner, her hair shorter, but it was unmistakably her. She was standing in front of a plain white wall, holding a newspaper dated May 2001. On the paper were 5 words: "Still alive, ask about Haven." Rachel's heart nearly stopped. Emily had been alive 6 years after her disappearance, but what was Haven? A place, a name, a code. Rachel traced every reference to Haven she could find. One lead stood out: a decommissioned private medical facility in upstate New York, once known as Havenwood Rehabilitation Center. It had closed in 2002 after an investigation into illegal experiments on patients. Rumors claimed it had quietly reopened under private ownership. Against Jenner's warnings, Rachel drove there herself. The property was surrounded by a tall, electrified fence. Security cameras tracked her every move. It didn't look abandoned, it looked operational. She climbed a ridge nearby and watched from a distance. Over the next several days, she documented deliveries, trucks arriving late at night, security patrols, even glimpses of people being moved inside under heavy guard. Rachel knew she was dangerously close to something massive, too close. On the 6th night, she was packing up her camera when she heard footsteps behind her. Before she could turn, a gloved hand clamped over her mouth. Another wrapped around her waist. A voice whispered against her ear. "You were told to stop." She thrashed, kicked, bit, but the hands held firm. A cloth pressed over her mouth. Darkness swallowed her. When she woke, she was in the back of a moving van, wrists zip-tied, mouth taped shut. The air reeked of diesel and fear. 2 men sat in the front, speaking in low tones. "She saw too much," one muttered. "Boss says bring her in. We'll deal with her there," the other replied. Rachel's pulse hammered in her ears. She wasn't just close to the truth anymore. She was inside it. Hours later, the van slowed. A metallic clang echoed as the doors opened. Harsh light spilled in. A man in a black suit climbed inside and stared at her with cold, assessing eyes. "You're persistent," he said calmly, just like she was. Rachel's breath caught. "Emily," she tried to say through the tape. He smiled faintly. "You'll see her soon enough." Rachel was dragged from the van and into a sterile, windowless facility. The halls were cold and humming with fluorescent light. Every door they passed was locked, reinforced. Somewhere down the corridor, she thought she heard a woman cry out. They threw her into a small room, bare walls, a single metal chair, and then they left her there alone. For the first time in 11 years, Rachel wasn't chasing the mystery anymore. She was part of it. And somewhere beyond those walls, Emily might be waiting. Rachel sat in the metal chair for hours or maybe days. She'd lost track of time. The fluorescent lights never dimmed, the air never changed, and no one came. Every few hours, a tray of water and bland food was slid through a slot in the door. No questions, no explanations, no answers. She replayed the man's words over and over, just like she was. It was a clue. It meant Emily had been here, maybe recently, maybe long ago. But it also meant Rachel's fight wasn't over. She wasn't a captive. She was an investigator in enemy territory. On what she guessed was the third day, the door finally opened. The man in the suit stepped inside, his calmness more chilling than any threat. "Are you ready to talk?" he asked. "Where is she?" Rachel rasped. He studied her silently, as if weighing the question. "You want to know the truth. That's why you came, isn't it?" "Yes." "Then you need to understand something. Your sister was never a victim in the way you think." Rachel's heart pounded. "What are you talking about?" "She was taken, yes, but she was chosen, and she chose too." It sounded insane, but the man's tone was measured, deliberate. He paced slowly around the room as he spoke. "We identify potential recruits, people with intelligence, resilience, and the right temperament. Daniel Price was tasked with collection, Marsh with observation. Your sister was supposed to be a test subject for a behavioral program." Rachel felt like she couldn't breathe. "A program? What kind of program?" "One designed to build loyalty, to break people and rebuild them with purpose. Most don't survive it. Your sister did." Her stomach churned. "You're lying." "Am I?" He leaned closer. "She didn't just survive. She excelled. She adapted so well that when the time came to release her, she didn't want to leave." "No," Rachel shook her head violently. "She was kidnapped, drugged, tortured. She begged for help." The man's expression didn't change. And yet, when given the choice to walk away, she didn't. She stayed. She's been part of this operation for years. Rachel's voice cracked. "Where is she?" He smiled faintly. "Closer than you think." Hours later, they led Rachel down a long corridor lined with reinforced doors. Her legs trembled with each step. They stopped outside one and unlocked it. The guard pushed her inside. The room was sparse but not a cell. A bed, a desk, a stack of books, and sitting by the window, her back turned, was a woman. "Emily," Rachel whispered. The woman turned. It was her. Older, thinner, her hair cut short, but unmistakably Emily. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then Emily's eyes softened and a tear slid down her cheek. "Rachel," she said quietly. Rachel crossed the room and wrapped her arms around her sister. The embrace was desperate, shaking, years of grief pouring out in a single moment. But when she pulled back, she saw something strange in Emily's eyes, not fear, not relief, something harder, something resolved. "I've missed you," Emily said. "Then come home," Rachel pleaded. "We can go now. I'll get you out of here." Emily shook her head. "I can't leave." "What are you talking about?" "They're not who you think they are." Rachel stared at her. "They abducted you, they broke you." Emily sighed, looking down at her hands. "At first, yes, I fought, I screamed. I begged for it to end. But they showed me something. They showed me what the world really is, how broken it is, how easily people are bought, sold, forgotten. I couldn't walk away from that." "Emily, listen to yourself. They brainwashed you." "Maybe," Emily said softly. Or maybe I just found something bigger than myself. Rachel's heart was shattering. So you're part of this. Emily nodded. I've helped save people, Rachel. I've helped build something that matters. You see monsters, I see a mission. You were the mission, Rachel shouted. They took you from us. Emily's eyes filled with tears. I know and I'm sorry, but if I leave now it all falls apart, people die, and I won't let that happen. Rachel sank into the chair, her body trembling. This was the reunion she had dreamed of for over a decade, and it was a nightmare. Her sister was alive, but not the same. Maybe she never would be. Later that night, Emily came back to Rachel's room. She sat beside her on the floor, their backs against the cold wall. You don't have to believe in what I'm doing, Emily whispered, but I need you to trust that I'm here by choice. Rachel looked at her, tears streaming down her face. Then why leave me clues? Why the Polaroids? Why the messages? Because I wanted you to know I was alive, and because I needed you here. Why? Emily took a deep breath. Because they're not going to let you go now, and I couldn't bear the thought of you being out there alone. The words hit like a hammer. Rachel felt the blood drain from her face. You knew this would happen. Emily nodded. I'm sorry. Days passed in a blur. Rachel was moved to a different part of the facility, given clean clothes, regular meals, and guarded but respectful treatment. They never asked her questions. They never interrogated her. It was as if they were simply waiting for her to make a choice. And slowly the horrifying reality set in. There was no escape. Not unless they let her go. Not unless she became part of whatever this was. But Rachel refused. She spent every waking moment memorizing the layout of the facility, the doors, the cameras, the rotation of the guards. She made mental maps, noted security lapses, collected tiny, seemingly useless details. Then one night, during a power fluctuation, a door was left unsecured for 30 seconds. It was all the time she needed. She slipped into the hallway barefoot and silent and ran. Past the rows of locked doors, past the sterile labs and storage rooms until she found a stairwell that led upward. At the top was a heavy steel door. It was locked, but through the small reinforced window she saw trees, moonlight, freedom. A noise echoed behind her, footsteps. She turned. Emily was standing at the bottom of the stairs. Rachel, she said gently, please don't. Come with me, Rachel whispered. Please, we can go home, we can end this. Emily shook her head. There's no home to go back to, you know that. You're wrong, Rachel's voice broke. Mom still sets a place for you at the table. I still wait for you every birthday. We need you. And I need you to understand, Emily said softly. This is who I am now. Rachel's heart ached, tears blurred her vision. Then I'll never stop coming for you. I know, Emily whispered. That's why I love you. The footsteps grew louder, guards closing in. Rachel turned back toward the door, but it was too late. Strong hands grabbed her, pulling her away. She screamed her sister's name, but Emily didn't move. She just stood there, tears streaking her face as Rachel was dragged back into the darkness. Weeks later, Rachel woke up in a hospital bed. The police told her she'd been found wandering near a highway rest stop, dehydrated and disoriented. There were no signs of where she'd been, no evidence of the facility she described. It was as if it had never existed. No one believed her story. They called it trauma, delusion, grief, but Rachel knew better. She returned home, but life was never the same. Her job was gone. Matt was gone. Her mother had grown frail and tired. But one thing hadn't changed, the empty chair at the dinner table. Rachel dedicated herself to exposing what she'd found. She wrote articles, contacted federal investigators, dug into every corporate record and shell company she could trace. Most leads went nowhere. But one day, a plain envelope arrived in the mail. Inside was a photo, Emily again, older still, standing in front of a new facility. On the back were 2 words, written in her sister's unmistakable handwriting. Keep fighting. Rachel stared at it for a long time, a small smile breaking through the tears. Emily was still out there, still watching, still fighting in her own way. The world would probably never know the full story of what happened to Emily Hale, but Rachel did. And she knew one thing with absolute certainty: her sister hadn't vanished. She had chosen a different kind of life, one that would haunt them both forever. Some disappearances were tragedies, others were choices, and some, like Emily's, were both.